Hello, and you're very welcome to episode 74 of The Fifth Court, a podcast on legal affairs presented by myself, Peter Leonard, barrister and mediator.
And myself, Mark Tottenham, barrister and editor of Decisive Law Reports.
Mark, good to see you as always. And last week we concluded our 2 episodes recorded at Dublin Castle to mark the centenary of the Courts Act. We had brilliant interviews with Professor Dermot Farrager and Gerard Hogan, friend of the court, a friend of the show.
Absolutely. 2 such experienced lecturers. I mean, really, you could just ask a question and let them talk for the whole time, and it was fascinating, really.
And it's a pity we didn't have a little bit longer, because we were only getting into kind of the more modern years, you know, so maybe I feel another podcast coming on down the line. Well, this evening we will be joined by our colleague in the Law Library, barrister Cynthia Ní Mhurchú, who is in the news these days for different reasons, as she has been selected, Mark, to run for Fianna Fáil in the European Parliament elections. Now, it's very important to say that we are non-politically aligned on this show.
We have had people from other political parties in the past, in fairness.
And we kind of stay away from the politics a little bit, you know. But Cynthia has the most incredible backstory, hasn't she? What has that woman not done?
Exactly. She's moved from media into law and now into politics. But of course, she's probably still best known for her starring role in the leading Eurovision Irish episode ever.
Absolutely.
As she and the late Gerry Ryan introduced Riverdance.
Yes, so we'll have to ask her all about that. So really looking forward to that interview. But first, 3 cases that you have identified from the Decisive website. Okay, we start tonight with a medical negligence claim concerning injuries sustained by a mother during childbirth. The hospital in question had raised an issue concerning the statute of limitations. This is the case of Keelty versus the Coombe Women and Infants University Hospital, and it's a decision of Ms. Justice Denise Brett.
That's correct. So what happened here was that the mother sustained tears during childbirth in 1995, but she didn't issue proceedings until 2022. Now, obviously, she was claiming that she wasn't aware of the seriousness until a later stage. Now, the defendant hospital wanted to raise the statute of limitations as a preliminary issue and call evidence in relation to that. Generally speaking, the courts presume in favour of a unitary trial where you don't have a sort of modular hearing. And so what Ms. Justice Brett decided in this case was that she had not been satisfied by the defendants that there was a sufficiently serious matter to be determined as a preliminary issue. So therefore, all matters had to be heard together.
Okay, very good. Well, next to a property dispute in which possession of a dwelling house was granted to a mortgagee, despite related constitutional challenges being taken under the family home protection legislation.
Yeah, so this is a case where it was a home in which a family lived, shall we say, in the sense that there were non-marital partners and their children living there. And so the female partner, the partner of the man who owned the house, was bringing a constitutional challenge, saying that because the Family Home Protection Act only protected marital families, that this was an unconstitutional discrimination. And on that basis, she was looking for a stay on the order for possession in favour of the mortgagee. And Mr. Justice Bradley said that was not sufficient grounds to refuse an order for possession. So the mortgagee succeeded in getting possession, despite the fact that there was a constitutional challenge in relation to this particular property.
Okay, very good. And that is the case of Promontoria Scariff DAC versus McDonough. And as you said, it is a decision of Mr. Justice Conleth Bradley. Okay, finally to a wardship case concerning a young woman and whether she should be discharged from wardship and remitted to the management of her own affairs, take control of her own life, Mark. And this was based on the evidence of a solicitor from the General Solicitor's Office. Were they the 2 people who came into us before? 1 or 2 of them, maybe? Yeah. And by way of a medical report and a social work report. So should this woman be entitled to take control of her own life?
Exactly, yeah. This is one of the rare happy cases that comes before the courts where a woman who had been, she had severe mental health difficulties in the past and certain ongoing issues, but the court in this case was satisfied that she had sufficient capacity to look after her own affairs, and it was not necessary for the court to remain in supervision of her life and her financial affairs. So
that's wonderful news.
And
absolutely.
They actually ended by saying, "I wish to congratulate her very sincerely on exiting wardship. Today's decision reflects a long-held wish of hers."
That is fantastic news, and we wish her well. That is the case of In Re Award on the application of the General Solicitor, and it's a decision of Mr. Justice Heslin in the High Court. Clio, the most recommended cloud-based legal software used by 150,000 lawyers worldwide. Want to streamline case management, automate tasks including your client intake process and billing while supported by a team of people 24/5. Visit clio.com/IE.
Silence in the Fifth Court.
It is my absolute great pleasure to welcome to the studio a colleague, Cynthia Ní Mhurchú. I think I mispronounced that the first time I said
it.
No,
I'll give you a lesson afterwards. Don't you worry.
Very good.
On Gaelic pronunciation.
And Cynthia, you have just dashed into the studio. You're on the hustings at the moment, and you've come from Waterford.
I have indeed.
Raced into us.
Yes. I dusach boire, Guramila Mahagi. And Vert, Peter agus Mark, on down Norma Vanshaw. I sound like a politician now, don't I? But the only thing is I absolutely adore the Irish language, and you guys know that. So any chance that I get, úsáid man Gaeilge.
We love it too.
So yes, I am just off the hustings from Dungarvan, where I met with Junior Minister Mary Butler, and we visited a number of community initiatives and day centres, men's shed, and also we met with the business community in the West Waterford and Dungarvan Chamber of Commerce.
Wow.
To listen very carefully and to enjoy their company and ensure that they are listened to and that their issues are taken up.
Well, we're going to get to the politics soon, but you have had so many careers, Cynthia. We're going to have to go all the way back. Will we start with, you're from County Carlow originally, isn't that it?
Exactly.
So where in County Carlow?
Well, I'm actually from Carlow Town. Grew up in Rathnapish, a housing estate, one of the first housing estates in the town for young couples. My mum and my dad when they got married. And then we moved then to Dublin for a while after my dad sadly passed away, and we lived in Rathfarnham. And then my mum moved back and I moved back as well. I was living in Beggar's Bush in Dublin, and I'm back in Oak Park in Carlow.
Wow. So Carlow called you back after all those years.
Yes.
And we were also going to get on to your legal career, and we know you well from the southeast and from obviously Dublin, etc., etc. But you initially started out, I mean, obviously, barristers going into politics, you're not a pioneer. There's a lot of them have done that before you.
Loads.
But you're also not a pioneer in the sense that national school teachers going into politics, because you were initially trained as a primary school teacher. Isn't that correct?
And then, of course, sometimes journalists go into politics or they go into be ministerial advisors.
Yes,
that seems to be the trend nowadays. Yeah, so I basically did the Leaving Cert and went into a safe job because, unfortunately, as I said, my dad had passed away and it was deemed, I suppose, the right thing to do the teaching degree. I went to Kerrisford. I did that and I taught for a year in Gaelscoil Óni Huirisk, our wonderful Gaelscoil in Catherlough in Carlow. And I got a permanent job. But unfortunately, Peter and Mark, the permanent job was undone by education cutbacks. And I started to apply for jobs willy-nilly because I couldn't get a teaching job. And one of the willy-nilly jobs that I applied for was through a newspaper, because at the time there was no LinkedIn, a newspaper called Inyo. And Inyo was advertising for a creator or for a láithreoir, a presenter for Irish language programme in RTE. And I applied, I got a screen test, and the rest is history.
So that was it. It was a newspaper ad. That's what got you on the telly box. And
it was a handwritten letter, or maybe it was an old-fashioned typewriter letter that was sent into Cursey to apply to be a presenter.
Okay, and the show was Cursey?
The show was Cursey. It was 5 nights a week live. I was teaching. I got some subbing just to tide me over for the first couple of weeks in September. And I was teaching, I think in my third week, I got a call on the Wednesday to say, can you start on the Monday? So I finished up teaching on the Friday, and the following Monday night, I was actually live on air.
Wow.
And a full-time job with...
A full-time job.
Fantastic.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Full-time job. Never on staff, though, thankfully, so you can't ask me any questions about RTE and the current climate.
Okay, well, that's
fine.
So
I was always a freelancer. I was always only as good as my last programme or my last gig. A bit like being a barrister as well. You have to make sure you put in not 100% but 150% in order to build up your reputation and good quality and deliver good quality work.
But the big thing, Cynthia, if we go back to those days, I mean, as you talked about, there was no LinkedIn back in those days. There was no social media. and everybody watched the telly.
Correct.
Everybody watched RTE. So it was Hollywood, wasn't it? Irish-style Hollywood.
Absolutely.
It must have been a big deal being on the telly in those days.
Absolutely. Yes, because everybody read the newspapers in order to follow celebrities. And it's hilarious now, I think, that I'm being referred to as a celebrity candidate when that was like 30 years ago. I don't care what they call me, to be quite honest. So long as they see my name, recognise my name, and it entices them to listen to me, because I'm just a can-do person. I want to do good things in politics. I want to continue with a lot of the good work that I've done as a barrister. And if it gets me attention, so be it. But yeah, it was like Hollywood. It was all that glitz and glamour. It was a very small bubble, if you like, or a small goldfish bowl. And I was extremely well known. And to a point, that was wonderful and enjoyable and all the rest, but hard to get some privacy.
Yes.
And at a certain point in time, I guess I realised, especially post-Eurovision, if I wanted to go further with broadcasting or the journalism, but particularly TV journalism, which I really loved, I would have to go to CNN, have to go to the Beeb, I'd have to go someplace else. I really didn't want to move abroad. I am very much I really like Ireland. I love living in this country. I really like my hometown, Carlow. And I guess I was in love with my sweetheart of 16, and we decided we'd get married and have a family.
Wow, okay.
So how long were you in TV before you made the leap then?
I was 10 years in TV,
10 years.
Mark.
Okay. And you started the Inns after your international gig on the Eurovision?
I actually had a year done in the King's Inns as part of the 2-year diploma when I presented Eurovision. So there was 3 years left to go. I always thought I'd go down to the law library in my retirement. But here I am. I don't even think about the word retirement now. I don't think I'll ever retire. I wouldn't have any interest in it, really. So I decided at the end of the 4 years, it was 1997, it was 3 years after the Eurovision, and I decided, you know what, this is probably a good option now from a professional point of view and also from a personal point of view, because I switched jobs from TV presentation to barrister. We moved back to Carlow, myself and John. We started a family. We did lots of things.
But before we move on to your legal career, can we ask you a little bit more about that night? Because obviously you were presenting before the whole of, I can't remember, is it 300 million people in the European Union?
Something like that.
I mean, you had the costume changes.
It was a big gig.
The big gig.
It was a big deal.
President Robinson sitting there.
Albert Reynolds beside her.
Albert Reynolds. And then, of course, you introduced the act. You introduced Rock and Roll Kids. No.
That as well. Yeah, I mean, it was the Eurovision of all Eurovisions, because the late Gerry Ryan, the wonderful late Gerry Ryan, and I introduced Riverdance. And as they say, an iconic show, amazing, spine-tingling. Everybody remembers where they were on the night that Riverdance was announced, and it went out live because everybody stopped in their tracks, whatever they were doing. And then, of course, we won the Eurovision that night as well, or that year, with Rock and Roll Kids. So it was double celebration, which meant that the party went on for a long, long time afterwards. We're talking about weeks.
And there would have been a dress rehearsal though, Cynthia. So you had a handle on Riverdance before the rest of the world had a handle on it.
Yeah.
Did you think it was going to be as big as it was? Or can anybody anticipate those sort of things?
I think it's difficult to anticipate. On the one hand, yes, I did say to myself, this is an amazing interval act. I've never seen anything like this, because I can remember the Hothouse Flowers had done an interval act when the Eurovision was hosted by Ireland before. And that was fabulous. They sang their wonderful song, Don't Go. And I mean, I love the lads because on Gaeilge, Chantosigi Goni Loho, right? But I knew that this particular interval act was just going to be, light years ahead of anything we'd ever seen delivered by any country as an interval act. Having said that, others thought the same thing, and we shared that, but we didn't really dare to dream. We didn't really dare to say, and of course, it would become what it became.
You wouldn't necessarily know, seeing it live, how it'll come across on TV, or is that a fair comment?
I think, Mark, at the rehearsal though, I mean, with the haunting musical score of Bill Whelan, with the amazing voices of Anuna, piercing, enchanting, Mishterach, Diaver, like Dochrete, Special, all those voices in Anuna. And then we see almost this butterfly woman coming out of some fabled storybook, and Jean Butler, and she's just stunning in her soft shoe, with her beautiful appearance and her beautiful costume. And then suddenly we have almost like the Bull McCabe coming out then, Michael Flatley.
He does look like a toreador, doesn't he?
No, he does. And then, of course, it builds up to a thunderous thunderous hard shoe dance. And it's as if there's non-stop dancers coming on. There's more and more, and there's more drums, and there's more of everything. And there was a great rapport between the two of them, between Michael and Jean. And there also was a great rapport on screen between Gerry and I. And the whole show seemed to be, it was unique.
Yeah.
It was special.
Well, after all of that, you decided you needed a bit of real drama. So you went into the law library, is that it?
Yeah, that's right. I decided that I wouldn't wait until I was near retirement to go down to totter on down to the law library with my little...
So why law? Why law, Cynthia?
Yeah, look, I was always interested, Peter, in debating. I was always interested in politics, always interested in Fianna Fáil politics in particular, always interested in issues. And I really wanted to add to my journalism career at about midway through. I really wanted to do more current affairs. I'd been doing various programmes and I really wanted to do more current affairs, and it wasn't really happening. And I thought, well, do you know what? I'm actually going to do this degree instead. A lot of the journalists in town at the time, in Dublin City at the time, were doing it. It was part-time. It was easy to do it whilst you still worked. But I loved every minute of King's Inns, really took to it. And I knew then, it was no wonder that I decided to go down very quickly after I finished the degree. Yeah. In fact, the year that I did the degree.
You're right, a lot of people do it. And a lot of people look from a distance. They say, oh, I'd love to give that a lash. And that looks good. And it's kind of, theatrical. And apparently they make loads of money, Cynthia. Sometimes people think that from a distance. But not a lot of people stick with it. You had a big gig, but yet you did stick with it. And you said, no, I'm going to give this a lash.
Yeah.
And you started practicing straight away.
Yeah, I did. I think the reason I stuck with it is because I love, I suppose, the mixture of elements involved in the work as a barrister, as a lawyer. And I like the aspect in particular, I'm going to sound like a holy Joe now, but in particular solving a problem or helping somebody to unravel something. I'm a people person. I am patient, I think. Obviously, you can't be over-patient because you have to take instructions and assimilate them and deliver back advices in a coherent way. And you also have to deliver it in the framework of the other side and the court then being the third party, the judge, hearing the case. So there's quite a number of skills. But the one thing I really, really liked, apart from the people and the clients and helping, was that it's very varied. It's never the same. And I loved being a barrister on circuit, which is basically a country practitioner, because I got cases from all aspects of law. Not the EU law, though, I hasten to add. There wouldn't be too much EU on the circuit, but all aspects of the law, whether it was crime, whether it was civil, whether it was family, whether it was landlord and tenant, probate, you name it, personal injuries. I got everything, and my practice changed very much over the years. And in I suppose midway through and certainly towards the end, I really, really began to devote myself to family law because I really liked it. I still like it.
And what is it you like about family law? Because I must say there are a lot of us who, should we say, dipped our toe in that particular pond and decided that it was not for us.
Yeah.
I mean, is family, what is it? Family law has a very particular sense about it. A family law barroom is very different from a barroom in, say, a criminal sessions.
I agree. I think, Mark, what attracted me was I have an empathetic personality. I like to help. I like to listen. And I found life has been reasonably good to myself. And I found that I was listening to people who hadn't had as fair a deal or as easy a deal as I had, but they're all great people and they deserve help and they deserve a second chance and they deserve any assistance that they can get to make their lives a little bit better. And that's really what attracted me the most about family law, that I could make a difference.
I mean, you often come across real antagonism, though, don't you? I mean, deep-seated, long-term hurt is built up, and it must be very difficult to kind of unravel that and say, right, the court really is only interested in certain issues to do with how you move forward. And you've effectively got to park all of that pain and just look to what is in the best interest of the children, how the assets are going to be divided. I mean, how do you...
Except I would classify myself, or I put myself in the category of not the, saying to the client, we really just need to hone on these three issues. I actually would do a lot of listening because these are clients in a really, really vulnerable situation and in what they perceive to be a very hostile environment of a courtroom. And becomes adversarial. It's even before they arrived. It shouldn't be. And we speak about collaborative family law and we speak about mediation and all those kind of things. So I'm there to try and introduce the fact that this is not going to be the worst day of your life. Do tell me a bit about the suffering, because if I don't actually empathise with the suffering, I may not do as good a job at all. Yeah. So I don't generally, I suppose, start with we can only talk about ABC, but you gradually bring people around. And that's why it's very important at the moment where there's the new courts bill and it's being proposed that divorces and separations will go into the district court, that I'd be absolutely against that, because the circuit court allows for that bit of time that it will take me as an advisor to a client to actually tease out and listen and feedback and reframe things and rephrase things and then maybe organise a plan of action.
And why do you think the district court wouldn't be able to do that?
It's a court of summary jurisdiction. It doesn't have the time.
Quick.
Oh, too quick. Absolutely too quick. And these are life-changing issues and life-changing decisions that you're asking a judge to make in relation to a client's life. You're talking about a family home, you're talking about a pension, you're talking about an income, you're talking about maintenance. But the most important aspect of it all is, if there are children involved, you are talking about a lifelong decision being made in respect of a really vulnerable young person. Yeah. And that really concerns me.
Sure.
Okay, and you have stayed a junior counsel, as are myself and Mark, but I mean, you could have gone and become a senior, but you're happy enough being a junior counsel, isn't that it?
Yeah.
Because you like the regional, you like being local, don't you?
Oh, I really do. Oh, I really like the local. I really like Carlow, as I said. I actually felt when John and I moved back to Carlow, I remember shortly afterwards, Rachel arrived, our first child, who's now 23. And I remember I was pregnant and I was walking down from where we lived on the Dublin Road, which is all very in the town. And it would have been the Dublin Road that I would have walked to go to St. Leo's, where I went to school. And I remember walking down and saying to myself, gosh, I'm really home now. I really feel at home within myself. And it was the loveliest feeling. And that feeling has lasted with me throughout all the years of raising, myself and John raising Rachel, and then David came along a year later, and then all the education that happened and all the, yourselves with kids, all the family life that goes with that, and then all the local committees and I suppose the organisations that I would have been involved in. Yeah, I really community-based person. Okay, well, great. Well, now, as we said, you're running for the South constituency in the European Parliament for Fianna Fáil. So how did that happen, Cynthia? Do you get a phone call? Did somebody come up to you? Did somebody knock on the door and say, listen, Cynthia, we want you? Actually, pretty much simpler than that. The way everything happens, I suppose, in Ireland at a social event. I was speaking with one of our colleagues at a meal one evening, and we happened to be seated beside one another. We ended up in a hot discussion about politics of the day, and almost the two of us came out with the same sentiment. He saying to me, why aren't you running? And me saying, I should be running to deal with this. And that came from, I suppose, the change and the move in terms of my career germinating over the last couple of years, because obviously David and Rachel were in college, they were finishing up in college, and I was thinking, okay, what next? I really want to do this political job, and it was politics, and it was actually the European Parliament, and the opportunity came along, and it only comes along every 5 years. Yes. And it's a 5-seater. Okay, so it's a big constituency. In terms of geographical size, it's ginormous. And we can talk about the realities of trying to cover all of that. But you have a sitting Fianna Fáil colleague in Billy Keller. Excellent MEP.
Yeah, of course. And absolutely he is. But I mean, how does it work? Because both of you are covering this ginormous geographical area. Yeah. I mean, it literally goes from kind of Wicklow across to Clare and down, is it? Yes, that's correct. Yeah, it goes all the way. Yeah, you could say from Bray all the way across to, Ennistimon out there on the coast, Liscannor, the Cliffs of Moher. So the way it's organised, like most parties, as you know, because we are seeking and hoping that we'll get that second Fianna Fáil seat, which would be fabulous for the region to have two Fianna Fáil. It would be double strength. But the way that parties normally organise it is they have a constituency divide. So there is a divide, which obviously party members are encouraged to look at, think about. One can't tell everybody how to vote, but it makes logical sense and it makes voting sense if the southeastern side, which is obviously my side, where I live, where I'm based, where I've worked, if all of, we'll call them the party faithful, would concentrate on Cynthia in that area and obviously Billy in the southwest. Okay, that makes perfect sense. No, I can understand that. And colleagues from the law library, are they out knocking on doors for you as we speak, Cynthia?
Yes, they certainly are. But colleagues in the law library, being self-employed, are extremely busy people. They hardly get any time to eat, sleep and engage in activities. So yes, I've got great support from colleagues.
Okay. So the European Parliament, as you said, that was the one that really interested you.
Yeah.
Why? What do you think you can do in Europe?
What I think I can do in Europe with the skills that I have, I suppose, as a lawyer, and with the skills that I have as a communicator, and with the skills that I have, dare I say it, as a teacher, is I think the legislative and the debating and the examination of legislation and the scrutiny of it and the working with committees, working with people to amend the legislation, shape it, present reports. I think I'll be good at that. Obviously, speaking in the Parliament, I think I will certainly be up for that, and particularly as Gaeilge, befrála mo chuid Gaeilge úsáid sa Parliament. If we don't use Gaeilge as Parliament, our stádas with our tongue, and we now are one of the official European languages, we could weaken that.
I have to interject for a second. Conal O'Moran is doing his nut the far side. You're saying all the right things. Oh, yeah.
No, but it's so important. I fell in love with the Irish language when I was about 10, because I had this really fabulous teacher in 6th class, Siobhan Cohen from Carlow, who encouraged us all to go to the Gaeltacht because she was from the Gaeltacht herself. And we all ended up going to the Gaeltacht year after year as a result of that one little piece of advice and her great teaching of Gaeilge in 6th class and 5th class. And the Irish language is tá sé ríthátach, tá sé chótáchtach dúine mar náisiún agus mar chultúr. It's so important that we have it. Without it, I feel we are just half a country. We are half a nation. And we really need to celebrate it in all its forms, particularly its artistic form, but also its communication form, its wonderful lyricism. And also, if we want to look at the economic benefits of it, it does too have an economic benefit in the sense that we do have industries that are obviously communicating trí Gaeilge, or they're exporting trí Gaeilge or whatever. And it's a huge boon to our economy and to our tourism.
And can I ask you, you said that you were particularly interested in the European Parliament. I mean, there's certainly a perception that a lot of work goes on in the European Parliament, but really people don't know an awful lot about it. That, the day-to-day work, you talked about the committees and that kind of thing. I mean, did you know much about the work for the European Parliament before you decided to run? Or what is it that makes you feel that this is where your
Yes.
opportunity lies?
I did, obviously, after the conversation that I had with a colleague of ours, I did some research and,
Are you going to name names?
Not at all. I got more granular. I got more granular about what exactly I knew about the committee work. I knew about, obviously, the constituency engagement because I see our own local MEPs and how they engage. But I suppose I did more research on the legislative work, the debating, the voting, resolutions, reports, that kind of thing. And then the interinstitutional negotiations. So you'd have the European Commission that we'd have to liaise with and to finalise legislation, and other bodies as well. And what really excites me is that the presence and the influence of an MEP for Ireland South, and in particular South East, is huge if I was to win the seat. We need a lot of regional development to come to the regions. It sounds obvious, but it doesn't always happen. Everything is top heavy in Dublin. The regional imbalance is stark where I'm sitting in Carlow, Wexford, Wicklow, Tipperary, Waterford, where I was today. Had a meeting with the Chamber of Commerce today in Waterford, and I can tell you that we and they and all of us in the room are very concerned about what we see as the triangle of rural Ireland, which would be obviously the farmers, the backbone of rural Ireland, South East, but also businesses, small to medium-sized businesses, and then tourism. And in between all of that triangle, there are people, there are communities that need to be heavily invested in. And the reason why I say heavily invested is because farmers are under so much financial pressure at the moment. Yeah. So too are business people. And the tourism sector, if you look at Ireland South East, we don't have a regional airport. We haven't had flights out of Waterford since 2016.
No flights at all?
No flights at all since 2016 out of Waterford Regional Airport. We have a Green Minister for Transport, Gerry Ryan, as you know, and there is a business report sitting on his table for months now to show that there is a business case now to reopen Waterford, albeit a weak one. But what I say is reopen a regional airport, even if it's loss-making, because the revenue will come from tourism, from another aspect of that economy. We really need an airport because with it, if you look at Shannon Airport, you would get thousands of jobs, 20,000 jobs created by Shannon Airport, and billions in return to the local economy. So that's a key piece of infrastructure.
So you have a lot of strong issues to campaign on, Cynthia. I hear that. Just going around on the hustings, what are you hearing? Where you pick up the papers, you hear that immigration is a big issue at the moment.
Yes.
Are you finding that on the ground?
Yes.
I mean, housing obviously is huge.
Yes.
Those sort of concerns.
I have heard everything from immigration and housing to badgers and to deer and in between, childcare places, everything and anything.
What's the story about the badger?
The badgers, infestation of badgers.
Really?
Yes,
Oh,
yes,
wow, okay.
Absolutely.
Is this a TB concern or just a more general concern?
Well, a more general concern because they have overtaken a garden of an old person and the older person can't cope with it. So, yes, I mean, the issues that the media talk about, it always interests me about the media because I once was involved in the media. And obviously they focus on the issues and then they repeat the issues and then they go again with them and then they get an update on that issue. But, sometimes they don't actually go down to the local area and find out what really is going on down here. For example, there is a road between Clonmel, between Cork and Waterford. Clonmel is right in the middle. That road is pretty bad for connectivity. And that one issue, for example, that road, it's vital that if I get elected to Europe, that I get funding for that road so that Clonmel can attract more foreign direct investment. And the same with Dungarvan, and the same with Carlow, my own hometown, the same with Tipperary town. You might remember, guys, if you practiced on the South Eastern Circuit, which I think you did, we all used to troop to Tipperary town to the Circuit Court.
Indeed.
And by golly, we thought...
Bring the sod of turf.
Yes, exactly. And by golly, we thought that Tipperary town had been less favourably looked after than an awful lot of towns. I canvassed in Tipperary recently, and to my sadness, I found that I canvassed all the streets and all the town, and unfortunately, this is a town that is in dire need of a multinational company to come in, to create jobs, to create footfall, and to have economies moving around, the shop supported, the local business, the local hardware co-op, you name it, and to align that with the farming community.
But Cynthia, obviously this is a legal affairs podcast and your primary role as an MEP is as a legislator. I mean, are there particular legislative areas you're interested in?
Absolutely, yeah. The EU Directive on Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence, this is a milestone, and you know that came in last year. It's the first ever EU rules on combating violence across the EU, so we'll have a uniform set of crimes against women, and all member states agreed on it. And not only does it include our traditional physical violence, but also psychological and economic and sexual violence and so forth.
And so does that mean that new offences will be introduced into Irish law as a result of this?
That's exactly it. It calls for stronger laws, cyber violence, better assistance for victims, steps to prevent rape, and information programmes around that.
So what kind of steps can be brought into?
So the steps that can be brought in, Mark, are essentially making a complaint about a sexual assault or about any sexual crime or a crime based on gender, making that complaint online. Okay. Secondly, perhaps applying for your first application, whether it's an ex parte protection order or something else, online.
Okay.
And so forth, to make it a much easier situation for victims, because I've worked with an awful lot of victims and they are scared. They are more scared than people, obviously, who are getting divorced or judicially separated. And the courtroom is not a suitable arena for them to be encouraged to go into, whether it's from, even from a financial point of view, they're penalised to try and get there, but it's not suitable. And so the easier we can make the process for them, the better. So they're the kind of things. Unfortunately, the directive at the last minute removed the agreed definition of rape between the Parliament and the Commission because the Council, which is all the heads of the member states, didn't agree with it and said, look, it's a sovereign issue about rape. I'm extremely exercised about that. I think it's a huge deficit on the part of the EU. It's very disappointing. And indeed, Women's Aid have come out about this at the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre and so forth, and I share their views. It shows a disregard in some way for the fact that we should be leading the way. And
there were particular states. Was it Sweden that had a different definition?
Macron.
Okay.
Macron, yes, exactly. He pulled out in the end and didn't support, and Germany didn't support as well. Okay. So that's one piece of legislation that I'd like to revisit because there's going to be a review of that within the next 5 years. And the other one that I am probably the one actually that prompted me the violence against women, but the other directive that really prompted me to say it's definitely Europe was the tech giants. So I've had 2 children. I'm sure we've all had children and we've all seen them with the mobile phones. And from the get-go, I had a sense that the internet was going to be a wonderful tool, but also a potentially dangerous tool. And through my family law practice, I have seen a lot of families and parents in trauma about the usage of phones and how to protect their children from the internet giants and all of the very large online search engines and all of the awful content, violent, pornographic, bullying, horrific content that a child can access just by putting in a false date of birth. So the EU directive and the Digital Services Act came in 2 years ago in the EU. We have a similar act that was enacted in Ireland in 2024, only very recently in February. And as a result, Commission Ní Mhurchú was set up. That's the commission which will roll out the directive under the EU and transpose it into Irish law. But essentially what I want in relation to this is I want to ensure that Commission Ní Mhurchú has enough teeth to impose criminal sanctions or to have them within the panoply of sanctions that a judge can hand down. There must be criminal sanctions for the tech giant executives who are flouting the law and who are not ensuring that there's robust age verification for any child who picks up a phone.
So Google and Twitter and all these companies that are based in Ireland will be subject to much stricter discipline.
Rigorous scrutiny.
Okay.
Yeah, and they can't just keep making excuses and saying we can't control it. And also, this directive is also looking at consumers who are buying produce online as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Cynthia, you've got about 3 weeks to go, I think, before Election Day.
Yes.
What sort of days are you going to put in? 16 hours a day? Is
Absolutely.
That, yeah.
And more, possibly.
And more.
Might have to just sleep in the car en route to events or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's grueling, it's an exhausting.
You're giving it a big lash now, aren't you?
Oh, I am giving it a huge lash. I don't do anything in half measures. I really want to win this seat. Certainly not for myself, but definitely to try and do some good in my community, in my constituency. And I really do think people are pro-European, and what I'd ask them to remember is all Irish voters are pro-European, but for some reason we send and vote in a lot of Eurosceptics above the norm of other countries. And so I'd really ask people to consider their vote very carefully. We need pro-European, we need people who are centrists. Looks like we're heading for the far right and heading for the hard left as well. That they are polar types of politics. They're not progressive politics and it's not healthy politics. So vote carefully.
And there's very good consensus work done in the European Parliament, isn't there? I mean, the mainstream parties do work together quite well.
Absolutely. And the ALDE party, which I will become a member of if elected, is the third largest party. And it's extremely pro-social progression for people and communities and all of that. And it's extremely pro-European. And that's the kind of party I want to work with.
Cynthia, we're almost there in terms of time. We have a final question, our final question about the book or the movie. Now, I'd say you don't have a minute to start reading a book.
No, but I did.
To look at a movie, but you did have time.
Oh, I did have time,
okay.
Yes, I did.
So what would you recommend to our listeners?
Absolutely, above anybody else, Claire Keegan, Foster, Small Things Like These, and So Late in the Day. I did a writing course with Claire Keegan. She is an amazing woman, an amazing writer, an amazing teacher, and I'd recommend anybody to pick up her book and books, those three I've mentioned, any of them. Read it very carefully. Obviously, Foster was made into an Colleen Keown, so that's very close to my heart because that Scunnán did so well in Hollywood. Yes, but she's amazing, and she actually lives, she went to school in Tullow in County Carlow, and she doesn't live too far between Carlow and Wicklow.
And a film's being made, I think, of, is it Small Things Like These?
Yes,
Cillian Murphy.
Which brings me on to Cillian Murphy, who I really want to talk about. Unfortunately, he's not related to me.
Of course he's from Cork, isn't he?
Of course he's from Cork, but he's not related to me, Ní Mhurchú. But my favourite film, because I knew you were going to ask me that, is Oppenheimer. Because it's an amazing look at the tortured nature of somebody like Oppenheimer developing this atomic bomb and having this awful conflict between his personal soul and that deep, dark night looking into it after making this huge, these huge bombs that took out hundreds of thousands of people.
Wow. Well, Cynthia, this has been a tour de force, I have to say. It's been absolutely a tour de France almost, to give it an even greater European dimension. It's been fantastic. We want to wish you well. Now, we are non-political on this show, Mark. I have to keep saying this, so we wish everybody well, but we do wish you well, I have to say.
Does that mean you're not going to vote for me on the 7th of June? You can't,
It's a secret ballot, and we're both Dublin-based.
So
well, I'm sure you have Cork or Carlow or Wicklow cousins.
Well, there you go. We couldn't possibly comment, but listen, can we thank you for taking some time out of your incredibly busy schedule?
Peter Pavalons, Muvrichas Cornul Richa, Agus Gomark, you've always been great colleagues. Thank you so much.
The Fifth Court will adjourn until next week.
So that's all from this edition of The Fifth Court. We hope you have enjoyed it. Can we say a huge thank you to our guest this week, barrister and politician these days, Cynthia Ní Mhurchú, who told us about her fascinating career.
Yeah, she's done it all, as you say. No, she's great.
No, it was really good. Really enjoyed that interview, and I know our listeners will as well. Well, before we go, I'd also like to say a huge thank you to our producer, Conal O'Moraine, and to Alison from the Dublin South Podcast Studios for her wonderful work in recording this show. So for me, Peter Leonard.
Myself, Mark Tottenham.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon in the Fifth Court.